This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
They come in riding high on the 3 championships that we won in 91, 92, and they had no anything to do with it. But yet now they play for the Bulls, and it's so. We were, when I got there, we get elevated to being a championship quality team. There's certain standards that you have to live by. You don't come pussyfooting around. You don't come in joking and kidding around. You got to come in ready to play.
We're down to the final 3 episodes of The Last Dance. This is the episode 8 recap of the documentary on the 97-98 Bulls, a look at Michael Jordan's career. And now we move up to his return back from baseball into basketball, that last few months of the 95 season, his startup of the new year where he's got to play with new teammates, how that goes. That was a pretty rough experience in the locker room from all the accounts that we get on this episode. We get a look at the 98 playoffs, matchup with the Hornets, a B.J. Armstrong Hornet squad. We get a lot of him as well. Plus the motivation for Jordan, how he gets motivated by the smallest thing. We find out a lot about that as well. And then we have that Space Jam break in the summer as well. So a lot to get to tonight on the Distant Replay podcast. I am Ben George. He is Mike Noto. You can find us online at distantreplaypodcast.com, Twitter, Distant Podcast, and then also on YouTube as well. So, Mike, let's jump into this one. Episode 8 recap. And we begin 98 playoffs. We start round 2 versus the Hornets. Back when the Hornets were really good. Everybody's one of the best teams in the 90s. They had the cool colors, cool starter jackets. They were great in NBA Jam. Everybody liked to use them. But the one guy I didn't remember much about B.J. Armstrong, but B.J. Armstrong was the first guy in this episode that motivated Jordan to step his game up.
Yeah, common theme in this episode is Jordan inventing things to be upset about because he's so much better than every other player in the league at this point, and the Bulls are so much better than every other team. He has to invent stuff in his mind to get him motivated. And the first example we see of that in this episode is B.J. Armstrong having a good game in Game 2 and leading the Hornets to a victory to tie the series at 1-1. And Jordan looking at B.J. Armstrong's reaction to winning a game as a slight to the Bulls, and Jordan just steamrolling the Hornets, who the Hornets were at this point. I don't think Larry Johnson was on the team at this point, was he?
No.
You had Vlade Divac, David Wesley, B.J. Armstrong.
Anthony Mason was on that squad, I think.
Yeah, I mean, give me a break. The team stunk.
Well, I mean,
I don't know why they spent a long time on B.J. Armstrong. Who cares? I mean, he was a good player when he was on the Bulls, very good role player. But I mean, he was probably in the documentary for 10 minutes.
It gave you a look into Jordan's personality because that guy's seen both sides of it, right? I mean, he saw Jordan get motivated by guys like him, and I was surprised that because B.J. knew how Jordan's personality reacted to something like that, that he would go that route and yell at the bench after he made that shot and make sure Jordan heard it. But on the other hand, I was like, well, look, you got a chance to one-up Jordan. This is probably the only time you're ever going to do it. So, right, celebrate it. You're probably going to lose the series anyway, so go ahead and enjoy the moment, soak it up. But after that, I thought a couple of takeaways I thought from this moment. One was him sitting in the locker room, Jordan that is, and a couple of his teammates, watching SportsCenter, hearing the report afterwards on B.J. Armstrong, the Hornets. One, the fact that he had to just see what people were saying immediately. Like he's adding fuel to the fire, right? But the other part was that's how awesome SportsCenter used to be, where if something ended, a game ended, the first thing you want to do is get SportsCenter's reaction. See the highlights on SportsCenter. You didn't have as many platforms to watch. That was part of it. But that was just such a good product. And it demanded and commanded so much respect just from everyone, both fans and players. You had these guys sitting there in the locker room watching this moment with Linda Cohn and watching the report. SportsCenter back then, Mike, was just a different beast altogether.
Yeah, so you have that run with SportsCenter, what I think it was from like the 90s through like the mid 2000s, where when you wanted from like, let's say 1990 to 2005-ish, right? When you wanted to see something or see if a team won or, put some context to the fact that, Jordan had 35 points that night, you were watching SportsCenter at 11 p.m., 1 a.m., or 2 a.m. There was just no in between about it. And then if you didn't catch that, you caught the rerun of the 2 a.m. the following morning. And it was just a staple of American TV. Everyone, when you got to school the next day, if you were in high school, everyone had watched the SportsCenter rerun that morning if they were a sports fan.
Oh, yeah. Probably watched it multiple times, too. I mean, it was just over and over. I'd watch multiple episodes. But that was the first takeaway. The second was just watching Jordan, how gangster he looked in the locker room the next day as he's getting ready for the game with a cigar in his mouth. He's got a cigar in his mug next to him. He's holding a baseball bat. I mean, he just looked like he was ready to go at somebody's knee. But it also told me, like, this guy's just so locked in that he doesn't need to be filling a basketball, practicing the rotation, feeling it off his fingertips. This guy's over here holding a bat and working on his swing in the middle of the playoffs.
Yeah, like I said, that's what this documentary is really hitting the mark, is these little behind the scenes sort of videos that you get that you would never have access to otherwise. I mean, we had our boy Wozniak even made a couple appearances in this one again.
I can't not see him anymore. Like, he's everywhere now.
It's
everywhere.
So funny. But this scene was awesome with him with the bat, just stewing, and I forget who was in the locker room with him. I think it was Ron Harper, but him asking him questions about B.J. Armstrong, trying to kind of get him fired up even more. It was a cool look into Jordan for sure.
Yeah, it was, and we quickly get to LaBradford Smith after this, and this was a game in 1993. They were talking about him getting motivated, but I don't remember if you knew this story, Mike, either. I had not remembered. I didn't know this story.
No, I didn't know this one at all.
LaBradford Smith was only in the NBA for a handful of years. Bullets for 2 years, Kings for a year, and then he was out playing around the world after that. So he had a very, very brief stint in the NBA. But what he did do is he scored 37 points against Michael Jordan in Chicago. And after that game, Jordan essentially makes up a story that LaBradford makes a comment on his way off the court. And they're traveling to Washington in 2 days, a day off, then they're having back-to-backs against the same team. And he uses that to motivate himself against LaBradford. And his whole teammates were buying into this too, right? He had everybody believing this, everybody motivated. And he goes out and destroys them by scoring 36 points in the first half to almost match LaBradford's game total. He does it in a half to make his point. But again, another example of Jordan he's in a completely different world when it comes to these interactions on the court and with opponents to get himself psyched up.
Yeah, and you're thinking to yourself with the LaBradford Smith stuff that, man, every other perceived slight of Jordan and all the stuff he gets motivated by, we have videotape of it. Why don't we have videotape of LaBradford Smith putting his arm around Jordan saying, "Hey, nice game, Mike"? But we find out why we don't have video for it.
It's amazing. I mean, it really is incredible that he can really just flip the switch like that, literally, but needs something to motivate him. And that's kind of the story of this whole career and why we're tying that in. But we go back to 95 in this documentary, back to baseball, where after the 94 baseball season, Jordan's planning on going back to the White Sox, right? I mean, it's what it seems to be the case. But this is when the strike happens. And Jordan's not going to cross the picket line, so he walks away with the rest of his teammates. And right after that, he meets up with your boy B.J. Armstrong again. They go out. They have a lunch. They talk about it. And B.J. says, "Come on out. Come to practice. Come say hello." And then that leads to him being in practice 3 or 4 days that week, taking shots, hanging out with his teammates, that sort of thing. But I never got the impression. I didn't really get the answer to this. And I'm kind of wondering, does Michael go back to basketball then no matter what happens? Or if baseball season picks back up and maybe he's making strides in baseball at that point and maybe he's got a chance to make the major leagues, does he stick around in baseball? And what happens there?
I had that written in my notes for this section of the documentary. What if there's no strike? And leave it to baseball. That strike was awful for baseball, huh?
Yeah,
I mean, right? Just from a lot of different standpoints, but losing Jordan might have been one of them. Who knows if he was going to stick it out the rest of the year in baseball? But I think what happened was baseball just made the decision very easy on him. because one thing Jordan was not going to do was sit around and not be in a competitive situation for a whole year. I just don't think he had it in him to do it. He was going to be involved in something. Like you said, he called BJ Armstrong, sort of initiated a breakfast with him. That led to him going to the facility. He got, back around the guys, and one thing led to another.
And this happened pretty quick, too, because, Jordan left the door open, as you mentioned last episode, in his press conference when he walked away from basketball, that, hey, maybe I'll come back in a couple of years. Who knows where I'll be mentally and how motivated I'll be. Maybe I'll come back. But this still happened really quickly because I don't remember – sure there was some speculation, but we're in March of the basketball season. So not many people expected Jordan to come back that season. Maybe the year following, depending on how things went with baseball, and the timing works out much better to where you can leave baseball, transition into basketball, start the season. So I just felt like this kind of came out of nowhere. As much as we knew that there's a chance of him coming back, this came out of nowhere and it happened so quickly. But I still remember that comeback, man. When he first stepped on the court, wearing the 45. It was must-watch TV every single night of that season, even though the Bulls were, about 500, as they said. He obviously made them much better as soon as he got back, even though he's not in shape at all. But every single game he played, I made sure that I was watching.
You're exactly right. It was must-see TV, and him with the famous facts when he was coming back, the "I'm back" facts. That's all it said was "I'm back." That's legendary. And you had to be in front of a TV to watch him play. It was great to watch him play. It was pretty clear he, in spurts, was great, but his conditioning wasn't where it needed to be. By his own admission, he came back a little bit too late in the season to really be primed for a playoff run. But you had the double nickel game against the Knicks at the Garden. I think it was his fourth or fifth game back. It just figures that this is a guy who's clearly not in the shape he needs to be in to play, but he still finds a way to score 55 on the Knicks in the Garden. It's unbelievable. Just a great performance. Yeah. One of the well-known games in Jordan's career, the double nickel game. Everyone knows what that is if you're an NBA fan. And after this, about 10-game run here in the regular season, he then enters the playoffs.
I thought it was interesting, and I kind of remember this a little bit too, but he's 32 at this point, and there's still a decent amount of speculation of how good can Jordan be again, right? Even in that first broadcast when he was coming back, you had Bob Costas as he's taking the floor, just kind of questioning, maybe just asking, will we see Jordan be the same player that he was? Will he ever be the best player in the game again? Can this happen? And I think that was part of the reason why we were watching early on. And when that 55-point game happened, that's when you knew, immediately, okay, Jordan's back. Jordan is not going to have a drop-off at all because he not only did it that quickly, but did it against one of the best teams at that time. The Knicks, that we see in this documentary, are going toe-to-toe with the Bulls quite a bit in this period, and he goes out into Madison Square Garden and drops 55. So I thought that was an interesting storyline, just to kind of that discussion of how good can this big guy be? Because I think maybe, you kind of saw him fail a little bit in baseball, and you kind of have the sense of, okay, he's an athlete, he's in his 30s. It's only natural to decline. So where can Jordan go from here? But as we find out, this only lights his fuse even more when they get in the playoffs, face the Magic, right? Now you got Grant back over there. This Magic team is really good too, by the way. This is a team that, if you played video games growing up, NBA Jam or NBA, I played the EA Sports game. I love this team. Nick Anderson just bombing threes everywhere. Shaq, a young, in-shape Shaq. This was a fun team to watch, and they caught Jordan at a great time because they were able to defeat this Bulls team, knock him out of the playoffs. I don't think anybody expected much of them, but the semifinal run, you never wrote Jordan off until he was dead, right? That's the only time you knew that he was out of it is when the game was over and there was zeros on the clock and he had a loss next to his record. So that was kind of the surprise. They celebrated this. I wish we could have heard more from the Magic players about this series and what it meant to win, because this is the only time somebody beat him, right? In about 10 years.
You know what you have to watch, Ben? Watch this Magic moment. It's a 30 for 30 about these Orlando Magic teams. And the main premise of the documentary is sort of what could have been if Penny Hardaway stayed healthy.
Yeah.
If Shaq ended up staying there instead of going to the Lakers. You hit it on the head. This team was so talented. At that point, you had, like you said, O'Neal, Hardaway, Nick Anderson, and also you had Horace Grant, who came over from the Bulls.
Yep.
And who in this series might have been the difference between the two teams.
Yeah.
The Bulls hadn't yet found someone to fill that role that Horace Grant left vacant. And, he sort of blossomed into a more of a star role with the Magic, and had to be sweet for him to beat the Bulls.
It was indeed, and they carried him off the court, Mike, in the semifinals.
That was great,
of a playoff game. I mean, well, what was that about? That was hilarious, though. But that's how much it meant to him and to that franchise to win that game. But we go into the summer, and that summer, again, the big thing with Space Jam when this happens is he's kind of gearing up for the next year, and he's trying to get back into shape. So a couple things from this I thought were pretty cool. One, they built him the practice facility, essentially. I mean, that's Hollywood for you. What? We want you here. You need to be here. You're a star. What do you need? Oh, you need a gym. You need a basketball court. You need all this. You need access to it 24 hours a day. All right, we'll build it on the lot next to where we're shooting your movie. And because of that, Jordan was, I don't know whether it was planned originally, but for him to bring guys out there to play, to have these games after his shoots, and they played at night, he said he got a chance to kind of really scout his opponents that he hadn't seen in a couple of years. A lot of kind of newer faces, guys that changed their game a little bit. This was an opportunity to do that. Kind of a game of chess, essentially. He was one step out of these guys. But I didn't realize, and you pointed this out earlier, this kind of led to a bigger kind of tradition in the offseason.
Yeah, so now you have it's pretty much commonplace now for NBA players to live out in the Los Angeles area during the summer. And from some things I read today, this sort of Jordan inviting people to play at the Space Jam set was sort of the beginning of that. So, it's been happening now for the last, 20 plus years or so, where it's become more commonplace, sort of all started here. And you had what I thought was a cool moment was the night that they lost to the Magic. His trainer asked him, "Hey, Michael, you want to, as far as the training schedule goes for the offseason, do you want to, reconvene in a couple weeks?" And Jordan looked at him and said, "No, I want to start tomorrow." Yep. I thought that was a pretty cool moment. And then from there, like you said, it's just Jordan focused on, getting his body ready for that next season. And this guy's shooting a movie all day and then playing pickup basketball against really good NBA players for 3 hours every night. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, and I would have to imagine he's at least like playing some cards afterwards too and stuff. Like, I can't imagine he was getting much sleep at all during this time period, but he was getting done, and that was a good point. I mean, that whole idea that I'm ready to hit the ground running immediately. I mean, he had all the motivation he needed once that Magic series was over to get into that mindset again, to take over and dominate, and it did, and it helps him that you go into that next season, and he's playing with essentially an all-new team. I mean, Pippen's still there, a couple of faces he was familiar with, but otherwise, I mean, this whole team, for the most part, at least the nucleus of this team that he was playing with night in, night out, was brand new. And it's like when you go into jail, Mike, right? Like you're the guy that's been around for a while. You got to test the guys immediately. And like they tell you, hey, you walk in, go punch the biggest guy in the face the first night in there. I've never served in jail. I assume that's still the appropriate way to attack it. But it's that same type of mentality. You got to test these guys right away and find out what they're made of, because I'm here to win. I'm not here to play what you guys were doing when I first came back and kind of pulled you back from mediocrity, essentially, and carried you. And all these other guys, just because you're a bull, you're not. We were 3 years ago. You can't just ride my cape for no reason. You got to earn this, and he made him earn it from the get-go.
He sure did, and he mentioned certain players. He mentioned Steve Kerr. He mentioned Luke Longley. He also, this is, like you said, Rodman's first year with the Bulls. He's going to fill that Horace Grant role that they sorely were missing in that series versus Shaq and Horace Grant in the Magic the year before. And, they get into in this documentary how focused Jordan was coming into that season, how much like you said, he rode his new teammates, and it all sort of culminated in this little section of the documentary with his confrontation with Steve Kerr.
It was great. And I love Kerr saying that he's competitive. I mean, a lot of times his talent wouldn't let him do and wouldn't let him match up with everybody else, but he was always so competitive. And you got to respect him for doing that. And that was what kind of set the tone for him in that relationship, as he swings at Jordan first and then obviously takes a shot in the face, and Jordan's kicked out of practice by Phil Jackson. And I think Jordan felt bad about doing it and calls him and apologizes, but I think
he immediately felt bad, which says a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It shows he has a sense of the moment and realizes what's going on. He doesn't have his head up as you know what. You know, he realized he did something wrong.
I just wonder what if Kerr doesn't push. Doesn't fight back? I mean, is Jordan the same reaction? But I mean, look, I think Jordan knew he crossed the line, but he had to find that line with these guys, I think, and that was so important for this team. And I wish we could have had some kind of discussion this episode or last episode, episode 7, on Kukoc coming into this locker room. Because I mean, we saw them announce it and that be the big part of the offseason when Jordan left. But I wanted to know more about this relationship when these guys played together, because we saw how bad it was in Barcelona for the Olympics. I mean, they trashed this guy. I mean, Pippen even said this guy can't play in the NBA if he can't take some pressure in an Olympic game against some guys playing some defense. And we kind of just brushed over the fact that he joins this team and how that relationship went. Plus, you had the Kukoc last shot. Like, I wish we could have found out how they felt and how that actually worked out and played itself out once they were in the same locker room.
Yeah, maybe we'll get some more details on that here in the last 2 episodes coming up. But other than Jordan saying in passing during the Barcelona episode, he said in passing, like, hey, we gave Tony a hard time, but he ended up being a good teammate of mine. But it was very quick, like a short little sentence. Other than saying that, you haven't really heard Kukoc talk much about Jordan or Jordan talk much about Kukoc in this documentary. And I wonder if we're going to get that.
Yeah, I hope so, because I think that's a big part of it. I mean, Kukoc was a big part of this team, big part of the franchise, too, in that transition in those 2 years that Jordan was gone. So, yeah, I'd love to hear more about it and how those guys got along when they first were all together, because there's obviously a lot of animosity between the two for sure. So that was a big part of it. And, Mike, and this team went from, being – and you look back on them, the team didn't seem to be that great. I mean, you look at the pieces they put together – now, they had kind of all the right energy and the right synergy with this roster. So it worked itself out really well. But if you just looked at them on paper, it did not look like they were that good of a team. This team went on to win 72 games. I remember kind of that watch to see if they could make history, night in, night out, kind of following and tracking how they were performing and seeing if they could get that 70 wins, because nobody had ever done it before. And this team was able to do it, get to 72 wins. Pretty impressive that Jordan was able to come back, get to that point, and get his teammates up to that level, because, I mean, you had Rodman, but who else did they add from that 95 team to this team that would have made him that much better?
Yeah, they had all role players who understood their role, And I think that's really that's the easy answer, but I think that is the answer. And then you had, I think Rodman in this season was a big pickup, because this is when you're still getting Rodman like close to as fully engaged as Rodman can get, if that makes sense. I think it was his first season with the team. I think he was really plugged in. And then, you have peak Jordan and peak Pippen, and you have a very motivated Jordan, which I think all sort of leads to this 72-10 season. And this is the best. This is like the most I remember really following a regular season in the NBA was this year, because the Bulls, again, like we talked about earlier in the episode, Jordan was must watch during this period.
He was, and he got his teammates to play with him and get up to that level, and they get to the playoffs again, and they run into Orlando, and motivation, man. I mean, that's the story, and Jordan had everything he needed to beat the Magic and really take it to him, and they went from that series the year before, losing a hard-fought one, to sweeping the Magic this year and just essentially cruising through that playoff. But, I mean, that, again, showed you the motivation that Jordan knew probably all year. I mean, it's like now I think about like a really good motivator being like Nick Saban and these guys on his coaching staff. When they lose a game, that picture, that loss goes up in the locker room the entire year. Like, that's all they look at the entire offseason. Like, I imagine that being Jordan for this entire thing. Like, I just want one more shot at these guys, and when we do, I'm going to destroy them. I mean, as simple as that. And that's what he did.
Yeah, look, this Magic team. If you ask someone, who they thought the arch rival of the Bulls was going to be during the second Jordan little run here, they would have said the Magic, with how that team was set up. And you look at just 1 year later, the Bulls sweep them out of the playoffs, and the Magic start to sort of deteriorate. You have Shaq leaving a trade. You have Penny get hurt, and they're pretty much never reached the peak that they reached the year before.
Yeah, quite a steep fall very quickly indeed. And it takes us to the finals with the Supersonics, a series that Probably of all the finals, the one I forget about the most. It's the least memorable of all the finals that Jordan played in. But they faced the Sonics team, a Kemp and Peyton-led team. No, everybody remembers that duo. Kemp was pretty nasty back in the 90s, and this team was pretty good. But, I mean, look, Jordan knew, I think, pretty clearly that they were going to win the series, win it comfortably. But he had to find motivation, Mike. So where did he find it? He was at a dinner, and George Karl, who he had a pre-existing relationship with, goes back to North Carolina and, previous stops. And George Karl was in the restaurant and walks out without saying hello to Michael. And you would have thought the end of the world just happened. You would have thought it was attack at Pearl Harbor with the way Jordan talked about it and what it meant to him and his motivation, because from there, he had everything he needed to go out and take it to the Sonics.
Yeah, I mean, the George Karl snubbing incident. I mean, we heard about that for 5 minutes. I mean, I get he needs motivation, but again, between that and the B.J. Armstrong, the B.J. Armstrong game 2 of the Eastern Conference semis that we heard about earlier. I mean, both these incidents, again, I just think he needs to find things to be motivated by because he's so good that he can't be motivated by things that mere mortals are. And that, look, he had a great series this series. I think you don't remember this series that much because it really wasn't super competitive. The Bulls went up 3-0. Sure, the Sonics won, 2 games in Seattle. Then it was 2-3-2 with the setup. But, it all led to a clinching game 6 for the Bulls. And I thought it was funny, the scene with Peyton when he was talking about how much it meant. Now, I like Gary Payton. So truth be told, besides in this little era here, besides Knicks players, he was my second favorite player in the league.
Okay.
So I had Gary Payton shoes when I was a kid. You probably didn't even know he had a shoe, but I think it was called the Glove too, or something. Like a play off the Glove or something. But he, it was funny him describing how when he guarded Jordan, the series changed, and Jordan like literally laughing out loud about it when he was showed the clip.
Yeah. Shaking it off. That was hilarious. I mean, the whole series with these little snippets of Jordan watching people talk about him is probably one of the best portions of the show, to see his reaction, what these guys say. And these guys believe it, but Jordan just brushes it off and just laughs at them. And it's got to be even more demeaning when you see it as one of these guys.
Such a good idea, though, right? I mean,
brilliant.
Rather than the director saying, "Hey, this is what Gary Payton said about you," he's like, "Hey, screw it. You want to see what he said about you? Here it is.
Right,
Let me know what you think."
And I still don't know. I mean, what was George Karl thinking? Not putting Gary Payton on Jordan.
Yeah, who's George Karl with the hardo move in the restaurant? Like, just say hi to the guy. What the hell?
And I even still think do we ever hear anybody else's account of that moment? Like, I kind of picture like Jordan back in a corner in a booth somewhere in the dark, and Karl in the restaurant somewhere, and he pays his check and walks out, doesn't even see Jordan, and just kind of just he's just in the restaurant at the same time, but Jordan just takes that as like how did you not see me and how did you not come by? So I don't even know if that
and Ahmad Rashad is somehow in the mix here too.
Oh, he's everywhere.
Ahmad's everywhere.
Dude, Ahmad appears to be best boys. He even tweeted out about Gary Payton that after game 1 of this series, Gary Payton asked for Michael Jordan shoes. And at that point, Michael said, I have him. I've got him.
And he was, I mean, getting back to what we talked about last episode, he was helping Jordan put his tie on before Jordan's dad's funeral. They were really close, these two.
You look at all the pictures, and Ahmad's been a great follow on Twitter because he shared some images from the Dream Team and some thoughts on this series. He's had some really good behind-the-scenes looks at Jordan. I mean, I didn't realize how close they were. And, I mean, if anybody was living that time, I mean, Ahmad was a huge presence in the NBA from his work on NBA on NBC, but also inside the NBA, which was like, wasn't it a Saturday show? I remember
NBA
it was like
Inside Stuff, buddy.
Yeah, Inside Stuff. I mean, I love that show. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
everyone did. I think it was on either right before or right after Saved by the Bell.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, his presence was everywhere, so it didn't come as a surprise. But I didn't realize their relationship was that close. I'm seeing that now and understand that is the case. At least Ahmad's putting it out there that way. I don't know if it actually is, but yeah, that's been a pretty interesting part of it. But it wraps up this episode with Jordan winning that first of his comeback championships and carrying this team from a bunch of guys that he wasn't sure about, had to kind of not really coach him up, but had to get him to his level and understand what it meant to win and to work hard to get there, because they had seen all the success the Bulls had, but had never experienced what it took. And and that's what they were able to do in this one. So we get that taste, and I love the way this episode ended too, Mike. They've done a great job with the cliffhangers essentially, but Reggie Miller, your boy Reggie, we're about to see the Bulls and Pacers in '98, and this game, this matchup was huge, and Reggie Miller thought he had the opportunity to knock Michael out and to retire Jordan.
Yeah, and look, I have a lot of personal experience as a fan with both the Bulls of this era and the Pacers of this era, and this was an awesome, for those of you who have not seen this series, this was an awesome series that they're going to get to next week. At least I remember it that way, and I hope it comes through. And those Pacers teams were a handful back in the day. They were a handful, and they always, I don't want to ruin it if people haven't seen or don't remember the series, but that's going to be a good series to get into next episode. And getting back to against the Sonics when he was crying in the locker room. For those of you who don't know, he won the championship on Father's Day. Did you think maybe getting a little too up close and personal with them following him in the locker room and taping him cry afterwards?
Yeah, it definitely was an uncomfortable
in the trainer's
moment.
room. You know what I mean? Maybe they should have let him have that moment.
Yeah, it was uncomfortable. You kind of felt like you were crossing the line a little bit, but I mean, that's this locker room. I mean, it's going to happen. I mean, we'd see that today, and I'm glad they caught it. I wish I would have asked him about it because Jordan didn't talk about that moment at all during this episode, and I wish we could have kind of heard his thoughts on. I mean, we obviously know what he felt in that moment, but let him kind of put in his own words on what it meant to win that championship and win it on Father's Day. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I'd overlooked that on my notes to go get to, but that was such an important moment and really kind of tied everything together.
But I'm so pumped though to get into Reggie Miller and talking about this series and going back and forth with Jordan. I mean, it's going to be awesome.
I'm guessing they're going to spend a lot of time on that because now we have the 96-97 season and then the final couple of rounds of the 98 season.
Yeah, from what I heard is the timelines are eventually going to intersect.
Right. Yeah, eventually get
so that's going to happen here probably.
Probably in the finals.
My guess is episode 10 will mostly be him against the Jazz in '98.
Yeah, kind of putting a bow on his career with the Bulls, I would assume. So, but it's been really good so far. I mean, these two episodes were solid. They weren't my favorite of them all, but I thought they were really good, and we learned a lot about Jordan as a teammate, which I think is kind of what everybody was waiting to see. And we got a real look at how he treated his teammates and kind of who he was in the locker room and in the practice facility. But you know what? I mean, I haven't changed my impression or my opinion of Jordan at all, and it doesn't sound like you have either.
Absolutely not. It's been enhanced, if that was possible.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we'll be back next week. One more Sunday to go. It's very sad that this thing's almost over with already, but hopefully when this thing's over, we'll have live sports pretty close behind it. We'll have to wait and see on that, but we'll be back again with a final recap of episodes 9 and episodes 10 of The Last Dance. This is Distant Replay Podcast. Find us online at distantreplaypodcast.com. Also on Twitter at Distant Podcast and on YouTube as well. So, Mike, any final words before we wrap this sucker up?
These were 2 good episodes, but like you said, I think these were mostly setting the stage for next week. Must watch next week.
All right, pal. Well, we'll reconvene again next week after another episode. I enjoyed it.